Did y'all have a good night last night, I hope? Looks like a lot of people had a good night last night. My name is Mark Ross. I'm an independent consultant. My consultancy is called Needle Consultants, and I have the pleasure and distinct honor of introducing Ashley Kilroy to all of you. But before I do, I want to, of course, thank all of our wonderful sponsors. Well, not all of them, but at least our title sponsors. The Cannabis Certification Council, of course, Denver Relief Consulting, and our great friends at Denver Environmental Health that have made all of this possible. So, after serving nearly 3 years as the executive director of marijuana policy in Denver, Ashley Kilroy was promoted in October 2016 by Mayor Michael Hancock to lead the city's Department of Excise and Licensing. Excise and Licenses is the central business licensing department for the city and county of Denver and includes the Office of Marijuana Policy. The department manages licensing for a broad range of businesses, including liquor sales, bars and restaurants, and marijuana stores, and cultivation facilities. In this position, Ms. Kilroy maintains responsibility for the administration and implementation of marijuana policy for Denver. She coordinates the marijuana-related work of various city departments, commissions, boards, officers, agencies, employees, and serves as Denver's liaison to local, state, and federal elected officials, agencies, and partners on marijuana issues. Ms. Kilroy and her team have developed a collaborative approach to marijuana management, facilitating engagement and coordinating the work of hundreds of city employees who are committed to the city's successful implementation of a legal marijuana system. Her work has helped position Denver at the forefront of cannabis regulation, enforcement, and education worldwide, and the city continues to lead and innovate as the industry and regulations evolve. Please welcome to the stage Ashley Kilroy.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for everything you guys are doing to continue to contribute to, as Mark said, this collaborative management model that we've implemented with regard to how we're overseeing the legalization of marijuana. It really has been important from day one that our office, when we were based in the mayor's office, was coordinating and collaborating with the industry, with our healthcare partners, with our neighbors, with the various different agencies that regulate marijuana, including Denver Environmental Health. So thank you for everything you guys have been doing. When we first got started with this, and we, I guess I think it was early or mid-December that the mayor asked me to move over to the mayor's office and start overseeing marijuana policy, with legalization getting ready to start on January 1st. And our team just started jumping in right away, learning as much as we could, and trying to ensure that as we move forward with legalization of marijuana, that we were balancing the wants and needs of everyone, from your consumers to the industry, and again, to our neighbors and our quality of life and everything, how marijuana legalization would impact Denver. As we got into our second year, we really decided, we kind of narrowed down our strategic plan and really thought, really when we think about what our mission is, our mission with legalizing marijuana and overseeing that process and the rollout has been to maintain Denver's quality of life. And a huge part of that is what you guys are here today to do and to think about and talk about, is that whole environmental quality piece. Very important to our citizens and their quality of life. Sustainability and environmental quality issues have always been at the forefront of Mayor Hancock's administration. Obviously, Department of Environmental Health is a key agency that has their Department of Environmental Quality in there. But also, the mayor has in the mayor's office his Office of Sustainability. So again, in the mayor's office, he has one small office that oversees all sustainability-related issues, and then again, sort of coordinates with all the agencies to make sure we are doing what we can to keep Denver green. And one of the things that the mayor and the Office of Sustainability set was this goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% from the level where it was in 2005, to reduce it by 80% from where it was in 2005 by 2050. So what you guys are doing here today is really important, really important to help us meet those goals. Oh, and the other thing, too, that the mayor has done is he recently signed the mayor's letter that supported the Paris Climate Agreement, which I don't know if you guys oversaw or saw some of that, after Trump determined that the United States would pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement, a number of mayors got together to say that in our cities, we are still going to move forward with trying to meet those goals related to sustainability. Another thing that's been really important and sort of fun about what we've been doing is exactly this type of thing, where we're helping to convene individuals and helping to share the knowledge that we've learned. You know, we might not have gotten it all right. We probably haven't. We've got a lot to learn. But if we can share what we've learned with you, and learn what you've learned, you know, and hear what you've learned, it really can help us overall build better communities and share that information and be stronger together. And so along those lines, we in Excise and License, we have an intern who's working with us, Samantha, who is on the front row. Samantha's from Malaysia, and she's here for a month in the Department of Excise and License to sort of learn what we're doing and how we've rolled out this implementation of legalized marijuana. As many of you probably know, Malaysia has some of the toughest, most draconian drug laws in the world. Including that if you are caught with possession of about 200 grams, you can be deemed to be a drug trafficker, and there's only one sentence, which is death. So if you guys have questions for Samantha, you know, she's here to learn about drug policy. She'd like to take some of what she learns back to Malaysia, and she's really interested in what you all have learned and what you're sharing here today. So again, thanks so much for everything you've done, and look how far we've come, really. I mean, if you think January 2014, it's what Samantha was saying. In Malaysia, they're talking about just decriminalizing small amounts of marijuana, and we're already past that, past medical marijuana, onto retail marijuana, and we're able to talk about details like this, like sustainability. So thanks for the work you've done. You really, we view you guys as a partner with us, and we've come a long way. We've got the best management practices guide was just out, your second symposium here, so it's great, and thank you for everything you've been doing. Thank you.
All right, we're right on time. So again, I'm Mark Ross from Neal Consultants. We are an independent corporate social responsibility consulting group. And people often ask, well, what is corporate social responsibility? It's a pretty broad term. I like to think of it as really 4 pillars: employee engagement, community engagement, corporate philanthropy, and sustainability. So last year, this panel focused a lot on social justice and community engagement. And those issues may certainly come up today, but we've got a different set of panelists this year to focus on different aspects of corporate social responsibility, and I'm really excited about what we're going to be talking about. So this year we're going to focus more broadly on a holistic, almost a 360-degree view of corporate social responsibility by looking at the B Corp program and the Best for Colorado program. We're going to be talking about the nuts and bolts about how one premier cannabis company in Oregon approaches corporate social responsibility. And then we're going to take a deeper dive into the interplay of fair trade certification in the cannabis industry, which a couple speakers touched on yesterday, but we're going to go a little deeper on that today. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our 3 esteemed panelists. I'm very excited about this. Liz Swanson, to my left and your right, is the program manager for Best for Colorado, an initiative by the nonprofit B Lab with the mission of engaging all Colorado companies in measuring and improving their impact on workers, their communities, and the environment. To her left is Laura Day Rivero. Laura Rivero is the operations manager at Yerba Buena in Portland, Oregon, among the first recreationally licensed farms in Oregon. She serves as the vice chair on the board of the Cannabis Certification Council, our generous sponsors this weekend, or this week, a nonprofit dedicated to establishing standards for organically produced cannabis using fair labor practices. And then to her left is Dr. Elizabeth Bennett. Dr. Bennett is an assistant professor of international affairs and the director of political economy, the political economy program at Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon. She researches, writes, teaches, and consults about fair trade, ethical supply chains, and sustainability certifications. Her work focuses on the importance of bottom-up social change, inclusive government structure, and empowering workers. So, with that, I'm going to introduce, again, Liz Swanson, and you can take it away.
Okay, great. And I think I will stand up here so I can see the slides.
There should be a clicker up top.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for being here this morning and also just for showing up to participate in this conversation. It's a really important conversation here in Colorado as well as nationally, so I'm honored to be here to contribute. So, as Mark noted, I work for B-Lab, which is the nonprofit behind a global movement of people who have decided to use their business as a force for good. And before I dive in, I'd just love to see a show of hands. Who has heard of B Corp before? Great. That's quite a few of you. That's wonderful to see. And before I dive into the more regional program called Best for Colorado, I'm just going to take a step back and kind of look at the high-level view of this movement and how this can really apply to the marijuana industry. So as many of you know, and I'm sure as many of the conversations alluded to yesterday, our regions face very complex issues, whether you're looking at the distribution of wealth or our environmental footprint in terms of carbon. And that 410 parts per million of carbon, I have to say as well, is actually 75% of that comes from industry globally. And so when we're talking about tackling some of these huge problems, we historically have really focused in on empowering and building up programs within our government institutions, within nonprofits, to come in and really try to address some of these biggest social issues. And there's a lot of amazing work that has happened. And a trend that B-Lab really recognized was really leaving out the business community in not only addressing the impact of business, but also trying to shift this conversation of business leaving sort of a mess in their wake and having a huge environmental footprint to actually seeing businesses as a contributor to addressing some of our greatest problems, socially and environmentally. So typically, business comes in and creates lots of opportunity in terms of building wealth, and in the process creates quite a big mess. And B-Lab started over 10 years ago with a mission of shifting that conversation. Seeing business as not only creating financial opportunity, but considering all stakeholders in their process. And typically corporations, especially in for-profit industry, has really been held accountable to consider first the bottom line and actually is legally held to that standard in their incorporation process. And so B-Lab has come in and helped to not only create some standards for businesses to start evaluating their impact and then to perhaps pursue B Corp certification, which is what we're most well known for in our work, but also to actually change their legal status so that they can be free to essentially consider all stakeholders rather than just shareholders. And this has a profound impact, not only on the environment, and as we typically talk about sustainability, the environmental footprint, but also on the lives of workers, on the communities where those businesses operate, and globally. So speaking about this movement, this is truly a global movement. B-Lab is the nonprofit, that operates here in Colorado behind Best for Colorado, which I'll get into. But B-Lab operates globally. We have partners in many countries, and we operate on a national scale, and we have over 2,300 certified B Corps globally, and that spans 130 industries. We're represented in 50 different countries, and of course, the unifying goal is to change this conversation around what the purpose of business is, to really allow for-profit businesses to use their profit as a force for good. You'll recognize many of these leaders on this slide, folks like Ben & Jerry's, of course. Right here in Colorado, New Belgium Brewery is a very recognizable name. Here in Colorado, we're proud that there is a lot of conversation, including this one right here, around businesses examining their impact. And so we have about 100 certified B Corps here in the state of Colorado. That's one of the highest per capita certified B Corp communities of any state in the nation. So we're very proud that here in Colorado there already is this awareness in the business community and this desire to do good as a business. And I will say, before I get into the B Corp certification process, that today we're obviously here around one specific industry, and right now, B-Lab, because we are headquartered in Pennsylvania and we operate nationally, we are not able to certify cannabis companies as certified B Corps. However, the tools that we've produced for businesses to measure their impact from a very holistic, very rigorous perspective is still completely available to all businesses, including the cannabis industry. And while certification might not be doable, cannabis industries can actually change their legal status to become benefit corporations. So when we're talking about becoming a certified B Corp, that really means, it's really a certification like fair trade, organic, but very holistic look at impact business models. And it requires a minimum score on the online assessment that has been developed by our Standards Advisory Council, which is a third-party nonprofit council that's actually made up of business leaders and thought leaders from around the globe who set these very rigorous business standards. And to become a B Corp, you have to meet a minimum score on the B Impact Assessment. And then, of course, making your business practices fully transparent is a part of the process. And then this third part that I'm excited to talk about with all of you that is a tool that's available to any cannabis company is this piece around accountability. And really when we're talking about accountability here, we're talking about is good business actually built into the DNA of your business structure. So how do you incorporate as a business? And this is where we have worked as B-Lab to create some policy around how do we make sure that there's not going to be one leader who comes in and leads a business through this B Corp certification process, and then as soon as they perhaps sell or come into new leadership, that all of that practice and all of that good work doesn't go to the wayside because of new leadership. And so this accountability piece and actually changing your legal structure from, an LLC or an S Corp to a benefit corporation. So when you go to actually incorporate as a business, you can incorporate as a benefit corporation. And what that really does is allows you to consider all stakeholders, not just consider your bottom line. And so again, this is an option that is available to all cannabis companies, and it can be retroactive. So you can go in and change your status, even if you're already incorporated as one legal entity. And what we're really excited about here in Colorado specifically, especially because we have such innovative business here in our state, including the cannabis industry, is that we've developed a regional program. So the B Corp program is really global, as I just alluded. And what we're trying to experiment with now is what would it look like if we developed programming that was regionally specific, that engaged local businesses, and maybe didn't have quite such a high bar. So while we've been focusing on shining a light on the leaders who are our certified B Corps, we recognize that 2,300 businesses, while that's a big group, that's certainly not enough businesses to truly shift the tide and push the needle towards responsible business practice globally to truly have a huge impact. And so we've developed a program here in Colorado. It's called Best for Colorado. And using the same assessment tools that are used by the certified B Corp community, businesses can access those measurement tools to start looking at how they're impacting their workers, how are they impacting their communities, and what is their environmental footprint really looking like. And then take that information and not only see how they're stacking up against others, but choose to make some improvements and access support to do so. And so Best for Colorado is a very holistic program here where businesses use the tool and then get connected to resources, whether that be improvement or just networking and sort of like B2B support. We do this work by working with over 30 organizations and institutions throughout the state as partners, one of which is the Denver Office of Environmental Health, among many others. And really, we're challenging businesses to compete to not only be the best businesses in Colorado, but the best businesses for our state, and really helping to tackle our state's greatest challenges. And this is where the cannabis industry has a huge opportunity to step up, and many of you are already taking that step by just showing up today, so thank you. There are just about 600,000 businesses in Colorado, and a very small sliver of those businesses are actually measuring and managing their impact. And what would it look like if all businesses did so? Even just all businesses within one industry would make a huge impact. Again, we work with over 30 local partners on this work, many partners who are experts in helping businesses do better, whether that's environmentally speaking, whether that's talking about worker practices, or whether that's talking about being a good community member as a business. And so by participating in this program, you'll have access to connect with those partners and learn best practices and really push yourself to continually do better. And through this process, we also are going to be recognizing businesses who do this work, who step up and say, yes, I do want to start measuring my impact. I want to start making some improvements, and we're here to help along the way. Also here to recognize you for that important work. It's a very simple process. Taking the challenge is the first step, connecting with peers, and then the recognition piece, which will be an annual award ceremony. The first award will be happening in spring of 2018. And so with that, I think I'll wrap things up by saying that the B Corp movement, we would love to be able to recognize and certify the cannabis industry, and I think we'll continue doing all the work we can as a nonprofit to align ourselves to be able to be inclusive of all industries. And one of those ways that we're working to do just that is by establishing programs like Best for Colorado. And when we're talking about sustainability, and I'm excited to turn it over to our next speakers here, but who'll go a little bit more in depth about what some other options are. But when you're looking at sustainability, it's so easy to think that we're just looking at environmental footprint, we're just looking at packaging and emissions. But really, if you can try to step into this conversation, recognizing that there are many, many stakeholders who are impacted by your business, and many businesses don't recognize themselves as, I'm not part of the impact business sphere, but all businesses have a huge impact, regardless of whether or not they're measuring that impact and also managing it. And so I'm excited to continue having conversations with anyone in this room who's interested in learning more about getting involved. And yeah, excited to continue this conversation about the importance of these types of standards. So thank you so much. And with that, will I turn it back to Mark?
Sure.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Liz.
Thanks.
Wouldn't it be great if so many Colorado cannabis companies do the Best for Colorado evaluation and B-Lab decides, hey, we're going to start certifying cannabis companies next year? It might be a little persuasive. Laura, would you like to talk?
Sure thing.
Sure.
I love to talk.
You'd love to talk?
Hi, my name's Laura. I'm here from Portland, Oregon, and I'm the operations manager for Yerba Buena, which is a Tier 2, which is the largest license available in Oregon at this time, a little smaller than what you have here. We're a Tier 2 indoor cultivator, and we've been very blessed to be invited to be here, and I'm just thrilled that this conversation is happening in Colorado and that so many people are attending and paying attention to this important topic. Personally, I've been involved in the legal cannabis industry for about 7 years. I worked in Arizona for about 6 years prior to moving to Portland to launch this amazing company that I'm very honored to be a part of. Before that, I've been involved in the cannabis industry for much longer than I can possibly admit to. But all of this experience, I've seen a lot of both alarming practices on both sides of the fence, as well as really beautiful practices on both sides of the fence, both in the unregulated industry and in the legal industry. I think a lot of people's first exposure to cannabis, at least in the unregulated side, is in trimming. It's also the most vulnerable position because it tends to be more transitory, called trimmigrants in Northern California, and that is indeed where I got my start in the cannabis industry so many years ago. And I want to talk about that just a little bit because labor practices are such a huge part of the evolution of this industry. So we're going to have a little bit of story time. The trim scene. I'm going to pick on Northern California and Southern Oregon mainly because that's what I'm most familiar with from the unregulated side, and we'll look at how that contributes to labor practices as we come into the more regulated side of things. So how many people here have trimmed before? Oh, more than I thought. That's great. Okay, cool. So you know what it's like. Lots of fun. In the unregulated industry, generally, you're paid by the pound. It's not an hourly thing. In employment law, there's definitely some issues with this that we've encountered as we've developed our trim programs and the multiple companies that I've been working with over the last several years. Often you're working 14 or longer hour days. This is partially because it's so competitive and there's a limited amount of product when you have one harvest a year in your outdoor cultivation situations. So everyone wants to get as much of that product as they can because this is potentially your job for the year. Lots of people like to have party while they're working, and that's totally acceptable in a lot of farms. Breaks tend to be frowned upon since there's a time limit and it's time-sensitive material. And the conditions aren't always that great. Sometimes they're amazing. Definitely worked on some farms where the employees have been treated just absolutely beautifully with, their own bedrooms, and, they're being fed organic, wonderful food in a very utopian environment. But I've also been in some other situations where people are very much taken advantage of, not paid. I have one of my employees right now was locked in a basement, his cell phone taken away until the weed was all trimmed. I've had several female employees that I know and other friends that I've known personally where their wages were kept from them until certain favors were issued. Some of the practices that are experienced in an unregulated industry can be just absolutely appalling. So a lot of glorification happens in this world, and I just want to kind of acknowledge the history of this industry because it's where it came from, and none of us would be here if we didn't have this unregulated industry to draw all of our experiences from, our genetics from. This industry was born from that. So I think it's important to understand where it came from, because that is the root, and it's where we're going to learn the lessons that can support further movements in a positive direction and the things we don't want to repeat. In Humboldt, domestic violence services answered more than 2,000 crisis calls last year in 2016, which is an increase of 80% in 4 years. And this is basically referring to mostly women being abused by their employers. So just something to be aware of, and an example of practices we want to move away from. One thing that I can say is, as an industry, we're the people that are able to do this right. If any industry can really make positive change, I mean, we are the granola grassroots people who want to fuck the man. You know, we want this to be a positive, supportive, utopian idea of what new business can be, right? Thanks. So we have that opportunity to design our businesses from the inside out, and design this entire industry from the inside out the way we want to see businesses be conducted across the board. Not just cannabis, we can inspire others. The tech industry did that, but how many industries have we seen that are being born before our very eyes? This is happening right now. It's not even federally legal yet. We're still in prohibition, and we're still designing our companies. So we have a great opportunity to do it the right way. So we all know about the triple bottom line theory. I would like to introduce the quadruple bottom line theory. And I think this is really important, because we know that we need to support our people. We know we need to do the right thing by our employees. We know we want to support the planet and be sustainable. We know that we want to pay living wages, and we want to contribute back to our communities. But I think that one of the pieces that we don't want to forget, or I don't want to forget, is that the people that you're hiring and the people that hopefully that we all are, care about this plant and are passionate, right? Okay, purpose. Let's not forget that people are here because they have a sense of purpose, and they want to be part of this movement to bring this plant into the light. And let's not forget about that spirit of the plant, and this plant has a consciousness that we're attached to, and we have to continue to perpetuate. It's not all about the dollar bills. So cultivation practices and sustainability is one of those pillars. Yerba Buena has become both Clean Green Certified and Certified Kind. Those are the two current most prevalent organic cultivation practice certifications by a third party. They're both for-profit companies. The Cannabis Certification Council is working to create a nonprofit version of organic practices, which I'm very, very excited about and proud to be on the board of that nonprofit. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in this area, and we really take this to heart and have developed our cultivation practices to be far beyond what USDA or organic or either of these certifications require. And so that goes into doing more research beyond just, are you using an OMRI listed product on your plants? Where did those products come from? How was your bat guano sourced? You know, there's a lot more research that goes into really developing your inputs and how you're cultivating your plants. The one thing is there are no current certifications for labor practices. We've reached out to every single fair labor practice certification that is out there, and none of them will touch cannabis, which is very unfortunate. Another thing that the Cannabis Certification Council is aiming to correct. And this is just such a huge and important part of our industry that I feel is lacking in a lot of areas. Not least of which is the living wage issue. What is a living wage? It's a wage that's high enough to maintain a normal standard of living. And that, of course, is going to change from one area to another. In Portland, it's really high. In Denver County, I did a little research. It's $12.24 an hour for one adult is the living wage. You guys are really lucky. If you have a kid involved in that, it's more than double. And so this is your living wage for a single parent. What is the average pay in the cannabis industry? $12 an hour, which is not a living wage. I'm proud to say that we pay over $20 an hour to our staff on average, and are not willing to sacrifice living wages for our employees at all. We also supply 100% of their health benefits, including dental and vision, and that's a huge expense. That's $5,000 a year per employee, and we have 40 employees, so you can do the math. It's not inexpensive, and it's a challenge as a business owner to make these decisions, but it's important to include that in your business plan from the very, very beginning, rather than holding that carrot over your employees with this promise that is coming. I think it's best to just do it right out of the gate. Having a community mindset. We're talking about corporate social responsibility, and Mark and I were joking last night that it really should be called community social responsibility, because if you're designing a company, you're designing a community if you do it right. It doesn't have to feel like an authoritative top-down approach where there's someone that's behind a glass window and is in charge and making decisions that affects everyone's livelihood. It can be a family, and it definitely can be a community. So some of the things that we do that I would love to see others emulate are things like living wages, healthcare. We also have an employee garden that everyone volunteers in. We have a CSA program where everyone gets a box of food every week. We have wellness days every month where we bring in a yoga instructor or a meditation practitioner or Tai Chi, or we bring in massage therapists once a month to help our employees maintain a high level of health. This is during their lunch break, they're paid for it, and then we supply them with an organic salad afterwards. That way they still eat, and we're supporting them in learning tools to take care of their body and have healthier eating habits. Healthy employees work harder, just so you know. We have a lot of celebrations. We love parties. You can ask anybody, I like parties. And so we do them a lot. We love to get together, we have barbecues, we have campouts, and this builds our team, and it also builds that sense of family so that our people are interested in doing a very, very good job at their work, because it's going to affect their brothers and sisters. We have a diversity committee that meets every other week to discuss positive and respectful speech and behaviors within our company. We are very avid on education. We do a lot of in-house training in all aspects, so our trimmers and our growers all know about what is powdery mildew and how do you deal with it and how do you spot it, and we know all about the medicinal qualities of cannabis and how to recommend things to your Aunt Flo who's got some sort of IBS or cancer or something like that, and you know how to recommend some different products for them to try and be a cannabis ambassador. And then we also send them to conferences and other management trainings and et cetera. So we love education and feel like that's a really powerful way to invest in our people. And we do a lot of volunteering. So we're parts of Friends of Trees, and we plant trees to offset our carbon emissions, because we are an indoor grow after all. We are part of Habitat for Humanity. We just did a Habitat for Humanity build. We adopt a park, we adopt roads, and these are just great ways to not only engage in the community and let the community know that we're not the big bad guys who are criminals growing cannabis in this beautiful valley where we live, but we're engaged. We want to help the community and be a part of it. And it also is a great opportunity for team building. So happy employees, they're going to have positive beliefs about your company. They're going to be your best ambassador and your best marketing, because they're out in the community. You're sending them to the conferences and to the different cannabis events in your area, and they're just like, yeah, I work for Yerba Buena, and it is the best company, and we grow the best weed, and you should buy it because you can feel good about buying organic products by happy people. And they're going to work harder. They want to succeed. They want to succeed just as much as you do. And that is such a valuable thing as an employer. And they're happy. This happy vibe that goes into your plants, I truly believe people are attracted to the flower on the shelf that is exuding the happiness that the people put into it. Maybe I'm a little hippie for you guys, but I really believe that it works. Those happy employees create the happy customers, happy checkbooks, make happy owners who will reward their employees and keep that happy cycle going. And I'll try to wrap it up. I'm probably at the end of my time. I told you I like to talk. So integrity, in my opinion, will equal profit overall. It is a little bit more money in the beginning, but I feel like you'll be rewarded in the long run. And we've been shown that by customer loyalty. We have so many people that will only smoke our weed, and we have a waiting list of shops that just would love to carry our product, and we just can't supply everybody. Good problem to have. Our community is happy that we're there, rather than not stoked about the weed people down the road. We have legislative influence. The legislators want our input. I'm on the Rules Advisory Committee for the Oregon rulemaking, and that's pretty cool to have a dreadlock girl on the panel. We have extremely happy employees, and best of all, we feel good about what we're doing.
Thank you. All right. Dr. Bennett.
I'll try to keep my own time here.
Okay.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here today. My area of expertise and what I do research and talk about most of the time is the global fair trade movement. And so you're probably familiar with coffee and chocolate bars that have a little label that says fairly traded, and maybe it elicits images of farmers in a developing country or people doing manufacturing in a growing economy like in Southeast Asia. And my goal for today is to bring lessons from global fair trade and from U.S. domestic fair trade to the cannabis industry. I've been studying cannabis for 2 years, and I've published a few articles and been collecting data in interesting and different ways over those 2 years. And I think fair trade has a lot to say to cannabis, and I'm excited to bring that message to you today. So, to give a little bit of background, and I think there are some similarities between the beginning of fair trade and the beginning of cannabis and sustainability activism. In the 1950s, after World War II, there was a group of Mennonite nuns from the U.S. who went to Puerto Rico on a mission trip, and they discovered that these people they were visiting were building great handicrafts. And the nuns said, "This is amazing. Why don't you sell these in the United States? We would absolutely buy your product." And the handicraft maker said, "Because we don't have market access, we can't export, we don't have the tools we need to build a global supply chain." And the Mennonite nuns packed their suitcases full of handicrafts, they brought them back to the United States, they sold them out of the trunk of their cars in church parking lots, and it was the origin of the global fair trade movement. And this idea has taken off over the past 50 years. You might recognize the name 10,000 Villages. In the 1960s, the idea that the nuns had of giving market access to small handicraft makers, small farmers, and moving more of the profits down the supply chain to farmers and actual artisans took off, and 10,000 Villages and other world shops opened up as stores that were exclusively fair trade goods, stores where everything that you purchased, most of that profit went back to the actual creator of the good. In the 1980s, new brands started to emerge like Equal Exchange. This is also a familiar label here in Colorado. This is a brand that's sold in a lot of the grocery stores here. And Equal Exchange and other brands in the 80s said, well, maybe people don't want to have to go to world shops to buy fair trade goods. Maybe they want to go to their regular grocery store or convenience mart and buy something that they feel good about, something that distributed profits back to farmers and handicraft makers. And so brands began to launch and sell their products in conventional markets. And I see some parallels here with cannabis as I talk to dispensary owners who say, we want to be the place where ethical consumers come to buy their weed. And I see brands saying, we want our brand to be in dispensaries all over the place and for people to seek out our logo when they go shopping wherever it is that they go shopping. And unsurprisingly, as fair trade emerged and became more popular, not all fair trade brands were created equal. There were the equal exchanges that did worker-owner cooperatives. They distributed most of the money back to farmers. They had long-term relationships with coffee growers. They helped nut butter makers own their own processing facilities. They did all these amazing things, but for every equal exchange, there was another brand that said, oh, we do pretty well. We'll just put a little sticker on our product that says this was fairly traded. And it didn't really mean so much. And so in fair trade, just like in cannabis, there became a need to differentiate between the hardcore yerba buenas and equal exchanges who are doing radical, amazing things that transform people's lives and empower workers, and folks who realize that fairly traded goods might sell and fetch a higher price. And so there became need for a label. So the label that emerged in fair trade, I should back up. Around 1988, fair trade labels started emerging. And for the next decade, over 20 different labels all over the world emerged to do the exact same thing. It was redundant. It was confusing for consumers as global trade opened up in the late 90s. It was difficult for a company to be based in one place and market to consumers in another place who are used to seeing a different label. And in 97, all of the labels merged under one global fair trade label. Today, this fair trade label works all over the world, and it works with two different types of companies, small farm cooperatives and large farms that have workers. And in both contexts, the goal is to take the money that people pay for a product in the global north and wealthier countries and get more of those profits to people who are actually creating the goods in the global south. In both small farm cooperatives and in large farms, the farmers are required to treat the earth well, to not use pesticides and herbicides that are on a do not use list, to store chemicals far away from their food, to limit the hours that children can work and the type of work that children can do so that their education comes first. And they're audited by a third-party independent auditor to make sure that these things are happening. When they do that, they receive a minimum price for the product that they produce. That price goes directly to the household that's producing the good, so it's a one-on-one. You produce more product, you get more of the minimum price. And then they also distribute a premium to the community, and that community premium can only be used for community goods like schooling, hospitals, scholarship programs, road infrastructure. So the focus here of the fair trade label is for people in the global north or wealthier countries to be able to transfer more profits to the global south. This label is dictating the working conditions for 1.7 million farmers and farm workers. It's price setting and determining what kind of chemicals they come into contact with. If we were to think about Fair Trade International as a global company, it would be the third largest employer in the world behind McDonald's and Walmart. So when I talk about labels, it's not a teeny niche market that maybe helps a couple of people sometimes, but in cases like fair trade, it's been able to actually transform lives on the scale of Walmart and McDonald's. So this, of course, is about global north, global south issues. That's not what we're talking about here with cannabis today. So I want to point out the similarity between agriculture in developing countries and agriculture here in the United States. A lot of times when I talk about fair trade and fair labor in the cannabis community, people say, oh, no, you must be mistaken. All cannabis that's sold in this state is also grown in this state. It's all fair labor. When my students and I went to 64 dispensaries, a random sample of half the dispensaries in Portland, Oregon last year, and we asked for fair trade or organic, some kind of environmental, socially responsible cannabis. And I can share more of that data in the question and answer, but one of the interesting findings was that 7% of the bud tenders we talked to said everything in their shop was fair labor because it's all local. So I want to contrast that idea that agricultural products made in the United States or cannabis grown in the United States is fair labor. So some statistics about what it is to be a farm worker in the United States. I'll give you a minute with this infographic, and then I'll point out a few things I think are especially disturbing. Farm workers in America are the least covered by national labor laws. Many states have labor laws that give exemptions to agricultural workers, so they cannot collectively organize in the way that workers in other contexts can. Every year, 20,000 American farm workers working in the United States report acute pesticide poisoning. Every year, hundreds of people die from pesticide exposure. The children of farm workers have higher rates of leukemia, birth defects, developmental disabilities, brain cancer, and other conditions because their parents' exposure to pesticide. Farm work in the United States is not necessarily better work than farm work in developing countries. In cannabis, as Laura pointed out, we have great documentation that there's no exception to this rule, that cannabis trimmers, people working on cannabis farms, are also facing difficult circumstances. And one of the things I hear a lot when I bring this up to cannabis industry folks is, not in my business. That would never happen where I buy my product. I don't know people like that. And I want to challenge you to think a little bit more critically about the condition of the workers on farms in your community, and to really question what might be going on and how you would know if that is going on or not. In my work with coffee, I interview a lot of coffee shop owners that advertise as being socially responsible or fair trade. And one of the things I like to ask them is, how do you know that the people who grew your coffee have a great life, like you claim? And one of the very common answers I get is, I once took a trip to Origin, that's what it's called in the coffee industry, to go to the place where their coffee comes from. And on my trip to Origin, and then I interrupt and I say, do you speak the same language? No. Have you ever been to that country? No. But on my trip to Origin, I went to the farm where I buy my coffee, and I did not see any exploitation. How would you know if you saw exploitation? Well, I would see people in shackles. Oh. I would see children being whipped. Oh. So let me clarify. If you don't see what comes to mind as exploitative labor practices, it's not happening. And he said, right, that's how I know. And so I want to challenge the cannabis community to be a little bit more critical than what I've seen in coffee, to ask the harder questions, to know that in typical farm work communities, 80% of women have faced some kind of sexual harassment. And a statistic that's not here is that 1 in 3 women know someone or have been assaulted while working in the fields. We think that number is higher in cannabis, that more than 1 in 3 women have been assaulted or know someone who has. This is a problem everywhere in the developing world, in the United States, in other agricultural products, and in cannabis. So my goal here is to suggest that cannabis doesn't have to follow these trends. As Laura says, it can be a new industry doing things in new ways, and you are not the first to do fair labor issues and work on this in the United States. You are truly standing on the shoulders of giants, and I want to share some of those great leadership examples with you. Oops. Sorry. It's a little delay. So on the left, worker-driven social responsibility has been an amazing approach to supporting workers. It takes the idea of corporate social responsibility and it turns it on its head. It puts workers at the helm. It gives them decision-making power. It invites workers to create and contribute to a work environment by setting up systems that actually work for them. As Laura said, this shouldn't be corporate social responsibility, it should be community social responsibility. One example of worker-driven social responsibility is the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, tomato farmers in Florida who have worked to create systems that work for them. They have convinced McDonald's, Taco Bell, and Walmart to pay 1 to 4 cents more per pound for tomatoes. In exchange, they create fair labor practices on their farm. They have a hotline for reporting abuse. They've increased their wages. In 6 years, over $20 million has gone into the pockets of farm workers in this community instead of being spread out in other places throughout the supply chain. And then in the top right, food justice certification is a label for agricultural food products in the United States. It's like fair trade, but it's for food grown in the United States and consumed in the United States. These are amazing opportunities to learn from what's already been done and to do similar things in cannabis. And I'll tie up pretty soon. So I've seen, because none of the fair trade labels will work with cannabis, and because USDA won't work with cannabis, there's been an emergence of cannabis sustainability certifications. And I want to push the certifications and people who might use them to think about being more robust, more radical in what they're doing with labor. And I bring that to your attention because I've been studying trends in sustainability labeling worldwide, and I'm seeing some really difficult things. Earlier this year, I published a report that showed that most sustainability labels, labels that self-identify as sustainability, as being not just about environment, but also about people, don't raise the bar for people. They ratchet up environmental standards, they go above and beyond the legal standards, but when it comes to labor, they reify, they simply repeat whatever local, national, state, or international law says they should do. They don't go above and beyond to support collective bargaining, and they don't necessarily increase wages or improve benefits. So if you're thinking about sustainability labels as a model for cannabis, this is where sustainability labels have gone wrong. So my challenge to you is, in cannabis, if sustainability labels are going to be used instead of fair trade and organic labels, to not forget about the people. And the questions I would urge you to ask are about ownership, standards setting, standards content, auditing, and results. We should see workers, unions, fair labor organizations taking ownership of sustainability labels. Those are the groups that know what workers face. Those are the people who should be at the head of the table. Standard setting should be public. We should know what fair labor organizations and unions say about the standards. Are they good standards? Are they robust? Will they help workers? The standards need to go beyond minimum wages and OSHA standards. They need to be empowering. They need to actually do something for workers. That's not what our minimum wage laws do. Auditing. Auditors need to be independent and well-trained. And results. Is this doing anything? Is there a difference in workers' lives whether their farm is certified as sustainable or not? And a few resources to leave you with. I can share those with you after as well. I know I'm out of time, but these are some places I might point you to for learning more about how to put workers at the center of your company or at the center of your sustainability certification, and to not ignore the people and people, planet, profit, but to really take the opportunity to create an incredible livelihood for cannabis workers. Thank you.
Well, I was really happy to hear Dr. Bennett talk about worker-driven social responsibility, and really happy to hear about Laura talk about happy workers leading to lots and lots of great things. I've only been really courting the cannabis industry for about 1.5 years, and when I'm not working on general corporate responsibility issues for individual companies, one of the trends I've noticed is that some companies have this problem with happy workers and employee engagement. And so one of the projects I'm engaged in right now is this one right now, which is launching this week with NCIA. And I'm grateful to NCIA for wanting to take up this issue about helping create more purposeful, happy work environments. It's a short, very short, 5 to 10 minute, totally anonymous employee survey. If you work with any direct cannabis businesses, if you work in any direct cannabis businesses, I would encourage you to encourage your employees to try to take advantage of this. We're going to focus on 3 issues, really, just to develop baselines around general employee satisfaction, worker satisfaction, around worker benefits, and in particular, what some workers would like to have in terms of non-traditional benefits. Not just more compensation or health care. Those are givens. But I think there are some real opportunities here to provide purpose-driven workers with other benefits that would make them happier employees, like bringing in yoga, or having a meditation room, or having time off to volunteer in the community. And then the third area also touches on that community engagement piece, and that's asking workers how satisfied they are with regard to their community engagement opportunities and what they'd like to see, what would encourage them to be more involved. So please, NCIA has generously donated 1 full Seed to Sale Expo pass for 1 lucky respondent. But please, the other thing we're trying to do is NCIA will be recognizing any company that has over 90% participation in this survey. We're going to take it on good faith. If you tell us all 125 of your employees did it, or 120 of your 125 did it, we'd like to recognize that, and we'd like to get a really robust sampling of where we are as an industry in terms of how we treat our people and what we can do better. I think it's going to be pretty revealing. We're going to be taking some questions from the audience, and we do have 2 mics, and people can start preparing to come forward. But I've got a few questions to kick us off that we've been bantering around internally that we thought would be interesting to have you hear the answers. And the first one really is, what's the business case for developing a formal corporate social or community social responsibility program? And yeah, we can start, yeah.
Sure. At B-Lab, we are always trying to stay on top of new research that comes out that really draws the correlation between responsible business practice and the bottom line. And across the board, it's just, not even up for debate anymore that there is a very strong correlation between better business practice and also financial sustainability, and actually these businesses thriving much more so than businesses who do not adopt, whether that's through a certification program or just through internal corporate social responsibility planning. And then also, as Laura alluded to earlier, I think that consumers really want to align, consumers and employees want to align themselves with companies who are in line with their values. And so distinguishing your business in that way, it definitely has a huge opportunity to kind of set you apart from other businesses and draw in, more loyal customer base. So I would say those 2 things, absolutely. There's a lot of research out there to point to that trend.
Yeah, I would say that attracting talent is a huge challenge in this industry, particularly. Everyone wants to get their foot in the door in this industry, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they have talent or that they're passionate about what they're doing, which is an important aspect. And if you have a robust employee program like we do, people will line up to work with you. And employee retention is also huge. If you spend, the time and money to train your people to be the best growers or trimmers or, whatever you're training them to be, you want to keep them. That's a lot of investment. And, I'm really proud to say that in 2 years, we have had 0 employees voluntarily leave our company. And I attribute that 100% to the way we treat, pay, and reward our employees.
And I'll just add that the research from places that have taken worker-driven social responsibility seriously shows that worker health improves drastically with paid time off with better wages and with good health benefits, and healthy workers who can come to work and do a great job consistently over the long term are good for the bottom line.
And one reference I'll throw out there, which I cite a lot, is a study that was done last year. It was a Babson College study called Project ROI. I think you can find it at projectroi.com. It was a partnership between Verizon, Campbell's Soup, and Babson College that analyzed multiple industries, multiple companies in multiple industries, and what it found was that companies that had these very strategic, thoughtful, integrated, authentic corporate social responsibility programs were able to attract the best talent, retain the best talent, had less employee theft, less employee absenteeism, were able to weather crisis events a lot better than their competition that experienced similar crisis events. A whole host of benefits for having these types of programs integrated into their business. Laura, what are some of the consumer barriers, do you think, there are to accepting these types of programs?
Education. I feel like consumers need to be better educated in all aspects of corporate social responsibility, be it from environmental standpoints and pesticide usage, and to ask questions about just how their cannabis was cultivated and by whom and whether the people were treated well. I think that people are very well trained to ask these questions about their strawberries and tomatoes when it comes to their cannabis. After they're done shopping at Whole Foods or whatever their organic store is, they'll go to the nearest dispensary and just ask for the most potent weed they can buy, and they don't really ask questions as much about how it's been grown and the practices and how do they know it's been grown that way, and how do they trust that the bud tender actually knows how it's been grown. Is it organic just because somebody claimed it was organic, or is there a third party actually determining their practices? I mean, for example, in Oregon alone, when the new pesticide regulations came into play, 30%, actually almost 40% of the medical growers failed by the new pesticide regulations. Almost all of them were claiming that they were organic. 80% of Humboldt County's cannabis last year would have failed by the Oregon pesticide standards. Almost all of them claim to be organic. You can't just trust someone at their statement of being organic because there's no third-party certification to say so. Well, there's a couple. And so without those certifications or somebody to give that education to the consumers so they know, I feel like there's a huge gap in that aspect.
Can I add some data to illustrate Laura's points? When we visited 65 dispensaries in Portland, 86% of those offered to sell us something that they claimed was socially responsible or environmentally friendly. Of those 86% that had something special on hand just for me that was really good for the planet, 20% of those explained to me that what made it special was that it passed Oregon's pesticide testing, which made it organic. Another 11% couldn't tell me why the product that they wanted to sell me was any better than any of the other products. It just was. And 4% of the bud tenders said all cannabis is organic. One said that's just the way they grow it. The education is abysmal.
They had that secret ingredient, love. So, I always cook with it.
You're speaking my language.
You should try my cooking. So we heard yesterday that there are a number of certification programs coming online. And through Fair Trade, you also explained, Dr. Bennett, that there were a number of labeling opportunities for quite some time before there was this coalescing under Fair Trade. What can the cannabis industry learn at this point as we are going through those very early stages of labeling? What can we learn from the Fair Trade movement to try to guide us towards getting somewhere that's not so confusing to the consumer and is a hassle for labeling for cannabis companies?
So one of the things that I've seen in fair trade labeling, and since the one fair trade label merged, competitors have come up. So we're in a moment of competition, again, between multiple fair trade labels, is that labels either compete with a race to the top or a race to the bottom. And those who race to the top set really robust standards, and then they measure their impact. And they show that farmers who are working on certified fair trade farms have a higher income, they have better health, their children go on to do different things. They show results because their standards are really high. And the certifications that race to the bottom show that they have certified lots and lots of farms, because it's really easy to become certified because the standards aren't that high. They don't talk about impact, they just talk about numbers of certified entities. So I think one thing that I've learned that's relevant to cannabis is for certifiers and standard setting organizations to decide how you're going to compete, and at least one has to be the race to the top that says we are going to set the most robust, meaningful standards, we're going to do it all right, and then all of you have to buy into that and say, we want to be part of the race to the top, and we want to participate in that. We want to be the most robust, we want to make the most change.
Questions from the audience? Again, we've got 2 mics. We'd love to hear from you.
Hi there. Hi, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. First, I want to say that I've been to a handful of cannabis conferences this year, and this is by far the best and most interesting panel I've been to, so kudos. It's also the panel that has the most women that I've been to, so yay. Yeah. So excited about that. So I have a 2-part question. We're talking about CSR. So I work with an organization called Kind Colorado, and we do basically what we call cannabis social responsibility for the cannabis industry. And 2 of the things that I think are the most challenging, one is that most times cannabis companies don't know their purpose or values, so getting them to engage with community is sort of the 4th or 5th step, because the first step is finding out what they care about. So my question is, how are you addressing that, and are you seeing it? The second thing is that I think that it can be, or I should say, I'll back up a second. I think that I want to be cautious when we promote that CSR is good for consumers, it's good for your employees, it's good for the bottom line. And so then cannabis companies go and do food drives, or they do coat drives, and they do things that don't necessarily have community buy-in. And I think that that can be a little dangerous. So something that we work with a lot with cannabis companies is not only to understand what it is that they care about, but also to help understand what it is the community cares about and make sure that they're meeting that need. So how are you doing that, and what's your sort of thought about that issue? That's it. Those are my 2 questions.
Thank you.
I'll jump in on that. Addressing purpose is really important, and I think that's a really good topic to bring up. And I feel like for our company, we spent a lot of time with a big whiteboard writing down words and ideas that were really important to all of us. We did this in our entire company. We included everyone in that kind of brainstorming session. And then we created a committee and kind of whittled that down into what our mission was going to be. I mean, this is what you do as a company when you create your mission statement and your purpose. And, you know, we just came up with a really great list of the buzzwords that we weren't willing to sacrifice as our company for anything, and that we were going to build our company around those cornerstones. You know, things like advocacy and community and responsibility and environmentalism and all of these things that we all care deeply about, and we're going to build our company around that from the very beginning. And there was arguing, and we threw around all kinds of different ideas and names, and finally came up with it took us almost a year to come up with what our final mission statement ended up being. And it includes, giving back to the planet, giving back to the community, and overall sharing everything that all of our successes that we accumulate over the years with our people. And that's something that each company is going to have its own response to, but it's a mind meld of your crew. And then you talked about the community buy-in, and I feel like we're rather connected closely with our community, and people really care about the environment, especially in Portland. We're lucky in Oregon that the community really cares about local and organic products and ask questions that are important, and we'd like to see more of that in other states. But doing things like planting trees seem to garner a lot of community support, and that for us was better than a food drive, which I wouldn't see the community even noticing. So good points. Anybody else?
And I think it's important just to recognize that giving back to the community isn't always philanthropy. When you're talking about like a robust CSR plan, just your business practice in and of itself can have profound impacts on the community. We're working with trying to scale our program statewide, and we're seeing that what rural communities in Colorado really need to be thriving and well looks very different than our community here in Denver. And so I think just being mindful that all business practice can really put community need at the forefront of the conversation, and then shape implementation practices around that, rather than saying, as like afterthought, our businesses better start giving back. I think community can be a part of the conversation from the very beginning, and business practice in and of itself, if it's the best business practice, has an amazing impact on a community level.
It's one thing to write a check, which we do that too, but it's a whole other thing when you bring a crew of awesome people to a tree planting or Habitat for Humanity build, and they're seeing the faces of your people that are engaged and wanting to participate in the community, and you're donating time instead of dollars, and that just is so much more meaningful.
And I just want to add, I think one of the themes that's coming up here is that business owners can't guess what their workers need, and business owners can't guess what their community wants. And so what's required is a dialogue and a relationship that happens over time, where there's a lot of listening. And I want to thank you for noticing that we are women on the panel, but I also want to point out that every cannabis conference I go to is mostly white, and we know that the workforce in cannabis 5 years from now will be mostly non-white, and that will be a change for the cannabis workforce, and that puts the onus on people in the room now to think about who we need to be considering and listening to in the future, and be sure those people have a seat at our tables.
I'm glad you brought that up. One of the things I love about B Corps is that you do look internal at a company as well with regard to diversity, gender parity, pay equity, where a company invests their profits in terms of impact investing and in other socially responsible funds and things like that. So it's not just external looking in the community, it's also being an example within your own business of how to do business right. So, questions? Yep, over there. That young, tall gentleman over there.
I'm going to stay seated. Thank you all for doing this. I'm curious to hear, probably from Dr. Bennett, but certainly from others, I wonder if there have been any successful strategies to encourage more consumer demand for these certifications. When Laura talks about the lack of education, I mean, it's music to my ears, because that's what I talk about all the time. And it's a huge gap. And one of the things that occurs to me is that, yes, we've done all this education. We're all so well trained as consumers to go around the stores and get the green label and this and that and the other. So I wonder what successful strategies from those movements can be copied here so that we can close that gap faster.
I'm glad you asked. I have two things I want to say about that. One is that in Portland, and I know Portland is kind of a special bubble of consumer activism that doesn't exist everywhere, but in Portland, when we asked bud tenders if people were asking for socially responsible and environmentally friendly pot, 28% said they got that question frequently. Half said they got it sometimes, and only 19% said no one comes in their dispensary asking for that type of product. So that means about 80% of bud tenders said that sometimes or frequently they're being asked for environmentally friendly or socially responsible products, which I think is encouraging. And then to your question about how to increase demand, Fair Trade America does a really incredible job of promoting the idea of fair trade and fair trade values in the US. And they host a lot of big events, and I've never seen the cannabis industry at the events. I know Fair Trade America isn't interested in a formal relationship and certifying cannabis. However, I wonder if there might be some opportunity to collaborate. So there's a Fair Trade Day and a Fair Trade Week, and many grocery stores have participate in those events where they're putting out displays, they're showcasing their fair trade products, they're educating consumers, they're doing giveaways. So I think finding out what's happening in fair trade, because those are the consumers that already have the information and who are already talking to their friends and family and purchasing thoughtfully, and then reminding them, as Laura said, if you're going to go buy a fair trade chocolate bar and an organic tomato, why not ask about those things when you go to your dispensary and that's your next stop? So I think dovetailing with the fair trade movement is really helpful. I think one thing that's challenging for cannabis is that something that's worked in fair trade is exposés and storytelling that's graphic and troubling about the working conditions of people. And I think that's hard for cannabis because it's been such a long fight for legalization that folks are hesitant to paint the industry in a light that's unbecoming. And that's a real challenge to simultaneously promote cannabis as something that should be legalized and is important, and to continue that work, and at the same time show the ways in which not all cannabis workers have a happy, amazing experience at Yerba Buena. So finding some way to navigate that paradox.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. I think we do have a break, though, before the next session start. Just want to thank you lovely ladies for doing this and coming in, especially the two of you from Oregon, to speak with us. And if we give them another round of applause, that would be great.